a royal guard stopped a staff member walking out with Queen Elizabeth's brooch. The morning sun spilled golden light across the rooftops of London, glinting off the centuries-old architecture that surrounded Buckingham Palace. From the outside, the palace looked like a picture in a storybook, grand, elegant, and timeless. But inside, life was anything but still. The corridors were alive with quiet movement. Footsteps echoed softly on polished marble floors, and the faint murmur of conversation drifted from room to room, blending with the distant clink of silver and the gentle rustle of fine fabrics. Each person in the palace had a role, and each role carried weight. Among those who moved through these halls were the royal guards, standing tall and motionless at their posts, their faces impassive, their eyes sharp. They were the living symbols of tradition, trained to notice the smallest detail, to sense the slightest disturbance, and to respond without hesitation. Visitors passing by might see only the uniform, the dark coat, the shining buttons, the towering bearskin hat. But the guards were much more than ceremonial figures. They were vigilant observers, guardians of history, and protectors of a legacy that had endured for centuries. The staff, too, moved with purpose. Housekeepers, aides, and assistants carried out their duties with a quiet dedication that was almost invisible to the public eye. They polished silverware until it gleamed, arranged flowers with delicate precision, and ensured that the palace ran like a well-oiled machine. Each task, no matter how small, contributed to a larger picture of order and refinement. The palace was more than a residence. It was a living museum, a place where the past and present coexisted in harmony. At the heart of this world of elegance and discipline was a collection of treasures that could take one's breath away. Paintings by legendary artists adorned the walls, their colors vivid despite the passing centuries. Rich tapestries told stories of battles won and queens crowned, each thread woven with care. And among these treasures, carefully displayed in a room that was as secure as it was beautiful, was a brooch that had once belonged to Queen Elizabeth herself. The brooch was exquisite. Crafted from gold and adorned with delicate diamonds and sapphires, it shimmered under the soft light of the display case. Its design was intricate, almost fragile-looking, yet it carried an air of strength and authority. To anyone who saw it, the brooch was more than a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol of history, a small but powerful reminder of the queen who had worn it with dignity and grace. Guards stationed near the display case treated it with a seriousness that reflected its importance, their eyes constantly scanning for anything unusual. On that particular morning, the palace felt especially alive. The usual hum of activity was punctuated by the arrival of a new staff member, someone who had recently been hired to assist with the management of the royal collection. The staff member, though polite and professional, carried with them a quiet restlessness. They had grown tired of the routine, the endless days of unnoticed labor, and the feeling that their work, no matter how precise, went unseen. Though they performed their duties without complaint, a part of them yearned for something more, something extraordinary that would make their life feel significant. As the staff member walked through the hallways, their eyes occasionally flicked toward the display case holding the brooch. It gleamed under the lights, almost daring to be admired, almost daring to be touched. The staff member's heart quickened, not from admiration alone, but from the thought of what it might be like to hold something so valuable, so historically significant in their own hands. It was a fleeting thought, one that passed through their mind quickly, almost like a whisper. Yet even whispers can grow louder in moments of temptation. Meanwhile, the guards continued their silent vigil. One guard, in particular, seemed unusually focused that morning. His name was Sergeant Collins, a man whose years of service had honed his instincts to a near-superhuman level. He had learned to read the subtle movements of the staff and visitors alike, to notice a hand lingering too long on a surface, a glance that lingered a second too long. His eyes, dark and steady, swept the corridor with meticulous care, missing nothing. It was a skill born from years of dedication, one that made him both respected and slightly feared within the palace walls. As the staff member approached the brooch, Collins noticed something that others might have overlooked. A subtle shift in posture, a hesitation in their step, a hand that seemed to fidget more than necessary. These were small details, almost imperceptible, but to Collins they spoke volumes. He straightened slightly, his posture stiffening, ready to respond if necessary. The palace, for all its grandeur, depended on moments like these, moments where vigilance prevented disaster, where attention to detail preserved centuries of history. The staff member paused in front of the display case, pretending to adjust the arrangement of nearby items. They glanced around as if checking for an audience, though no one had approached yet. Their movements were careful, calculated, almost imperceptible, but Collins saw them clearly. He felt a familiar twinge of anticipation, not fear but awareness. Something was about to happen, he could sense it, and he knew that every second counted. Time seemed to slow in that quiet corridor. The light reflecting off the brooch caught the staff member's eye, and they allowed themselves a moment of fascination. The diamonds sparkled with an inner fire. The gold gleamed with a warmth that seemed to pulse with history. It was beautiful in a way that was almost overwhelming, and for a brief instant, the staff member felt a connection to the Queen herself, as if they could understand the weight of her life and the responsibility she carried. Yet alongside that awe was a gnawing desire, a thought that refused to be ignored. Collins took a step closer, his presence subtle yet commanding. He didn't speak, but his eyes communicated a warning, a reminder that this was not a space for carelessness. The staff member noticed him and straightened, offering a polite nod, masking the inner turmoil that churned beneath the surface. They continued their task, but every move was now shadowed by the guard's unblinking gaze. It was a silent contest of attention, a quiet struggle between duty and temptation, and neither side had yet made a mistake. In that moment, the palace itself seemed to hold its breath. The walls, lined with portraits of monarchs and courtiers long gone, bore witness to the unfolding scene. The floors, polished to a reflective shine, seemed to echo every movement, every subtle shift. Even the chandeliers overhead, sparkling with crystal light, appeared to shimmer in anticipation. It was as if the palace, steeped in centuries of history, understood the significance of the moment and waited for what would come next. The staff member glanced once more at the brooch, their thoughts racing. They reminded themselves of their duties, of the importance of integrity, of the countless eyes, both seen and unseen, that watched over the treasures of the palace. Yet the pull of the brooch was undeniable, and the moment felt suspended between possibility and consequence. Collins's steady presence was a counterweight to temptation, a reminder that vigilance was not passive but active, a living shield protecting history from being lost or compromised. For several long minutes, the staff member lingered near the display, caught in the tension of admiration and desire, of curiosity and conscience. Collins's watchful eyes followed every subtle movement, his mind already preparing for the actions he might need to take. The palace remained quiet around them, the distant sounds of daily life continuing in muted harmony, yet within that corridor, something important was unfolding. It was a test of character, of discipline, and of the silent rules that governed the palace and its treasures. Finally, as the staff member took a step back from the display, a sense of calm began to return. They straightened their uniform, adjusted their composure, and continued on their way, for now resisting the temptation that had briefly flickered in their mind. Collins relaxed slightly, though his gaze never wavered, knowing that vigilance required constant attention. The morning passed, the sun climbed higher, and the palace resumed its rhythm, yet the brooch remained, sparkling under the light, a silent witness to the human drama that had quietly played out before it. And in that quiet, tense moment, the palace had reminded everyone within its walls of a simple truth, that even in the most routine of days, the smallest actions, the briefest glances, and the quietest decisions could shape history, preserve treasures, and define character. The palace hummed with quiet activity as the day moved forward, but in one hallway, a tension lingered that only a trained eye could perceive. The staff member, who had lingered near the brooch earlier, walked with an unusual precision now, as if every step and every movement had been carefully measured. Their mind raced with thoughts that they did not share with anyone, thoughts of possibilities that danced on the edge of caution. While outwardly calm, there was a flicker of restlessness in their eyes, a subtle shadow of unease that had not been there before. The royal guards continued their silent watch. Sergeant Collins remained attentive, though he moved subtly now to position himself so that he had a clear line of sight toward the display case. He had learned, after many years of service, that human behavior often betrayed itself in the smallest gestures, a hand brushing too long against a railing, a glance that lingered just a moment too long. His gaze tracked the staff member's movements with unwavering focus. He did not want to make a show of suspicion, but he also could not afford to let inattention cost the palace even a single treasure. The staff member approached the display case again, this time with a little more purpose. Their eyes swept the corridor, careful to note that the nearest guards were positioned slightly farther down the hall. They moved slowly, deliberately, as though each action was part of a routine, but Collins noticed a subtle hesitation in the way they handled objects nearby. The staff member adjusted the arrangement of papers and small decorative items in a way that seemed innocuous, yet Collins had trained himself to recognize patterns of distraction. Something was off, and he could feel it in the slight tension that ran along his spine. The corridor seemed to contract around them. Even the walls, lined with portraits of past monarchs, seemed to watch silently, their painted eyes holding centuries of history. The staff member's hand hovered near the edge of the display case. They did not touch the brooch, not yet, but their fingers trembled slightly, betraying a nervous excitement. It was a delicate balance between admiration and temptation, and they seemed keenly aware of it, pausing frequently to scan the room as though ensuring that no one noticed the subtle movements. Collins, standing perfectly still, observed the staff member's behavior with the patience of someone who had seen countless incidents unfold before. He did not rush. He did not intervene too early. He knew that timing was crucial. Guards were trained to respond swiftly, yes, but there was also a skill in knowing when to wait, when to observe silently, letting a suspect's actions reveal their intent. Collins's eyes never left the staff member, following every flicker of the hand, every twitch of the face, every shuffle of the feet. The staff member's breathing was calm, almost imperceptibly so, yet there was a tension in their shoulders that betrayed a growing urgency. They seemed to measure the distance between themselves and the guards, to calculate the moments when attention might be elsewhere. It was clear that they had given some thought to what they were doing, and yet, beneath their careful exterior, a subtle fear began to creep in. Even as they toyed with the idea of taking something precious, they were also aware that being caught would carry consequences far beyond a simple reprimand. For several minutes they lingered near the case, moving objects around as if tidying, as if ensuring that everything looked just so. Every so often they glanced over their shoulder, their eyes scanning the corridor for other staff, for visitors, for the ever-present royal guards. Collins noted each glance, each shift of weight, each subtle hesitation. He did not speak. He did not act. He simply observed, letting the staff members' actions unfold naturally, knowing that it would soon become clear whether this was mere curiosity or something more. The staff member's hand moved slightly closer to the brooch, brushing against the edge of the display case. It was a near imperceptible motion, a small gesture that might have gone unnoticed by anyone less attentive. But Collins caught it immediately. His mind catalogued the movement, marking it as potentially significant. He knew that many incidents in the palace began with seemingly innocent actions, small touches or fleeting glances that revealed intent before any harm could occur. This was such a moment. Suddenly, the staff member paused. Their eyes widened slightly as if realizing that someone had noticed. They straightened, masking any signs of agitation with a polite, almost rehearsed expression. They stepped back from the case, hands folded neatly in front of them, and resumed their work as though nothing had happened. Collins did not move, did not acknowledge them. He simply maintained his watch, letting the tension linger in the air like a charged current. The staff member began walking toward the hallway exit, a subtle shift in gait indicating a return to routine duties. But Collins noticed that their glances continued to dart back toward the display case, toward the brooch that had sparked this quiet moment of temptation. There was a fascination there, a mixture of admiration and longing, and it was clear that the brooch had captured more than their attention. It had captured their imagination. Collins's mind raced with possibilities. He considered the risks, the potential consequences, and the need to act without drawing unnecessary attention. He had been trained for moments like this, for situations where even the smallest oversight could lead to loss. He knew that the palace's treasures were irreplaceable, and that protecting them required vigilance, patience, and careful judgment. Every instinct told him to remain alert, to let the situation reveal itself fully before intervening. The staff member paused again, this time near a decorative vase that had been polished that morning. Their fingers hovered over it, adjusting its position slightly, and Collins observed the subtle hesitation in their movements. It was almost imperceptible, yet to someone trained to read human behavior, it spoke volumes. The staff member was tempted, curious, and uncertain, and in that uncertainty, Collins saw the opportunity to act decisively if necessary. Minutes passed in this quiet standoff, each one stretching longer than the last. The palace seemed to hold its breath, the distant sounds of daily life fading into a hushed backdrop. Every glance, every gesture, every movement carried meaning, and Collins analyzed each one carefully. He had learned that in such moments, patience was just as important as action. Acting too soon could alert the staff member, allow them to escape, or cause unnecessary embarrassment. Waiting allowed the truth to reveal itself naturally. The staff member's movements became more deliberate, more focused. They adjusted the position of a small silver tray near the display case, their fingers brushing against the edge of the glass once more. Collins felt a familiar twinge of anticipation, a signal that a critical moment was approaching. He tightened his stance slightly, ready to intervene if needed, though he remained outwardly calm and composed. The palace demanded discretion, and Collins had always understood that subtlety was as important as strength. At that moment, a fellow staff member walked by, carrying a stack of linens. The staff member near the brooch froze slightly, startled by the presence of a colleague. They adjusted their posture, smiled politely, and stepped aside, continuing to watch the display case with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Collins noted the reaction carefully, seeing in it both a natural human instinct to hide uncertainty and a subtle confirmation of the staff member's earlier hesitation. The corridor remained quiet, the tension in the air almost tangible. The brooch, gleaming under the light of the display case, seemed to beckon silently, a glittering reminder of history, prestige, and responsibility. The staff members' eyes lingered on it again, their admiration clear, their desire barely restrained. Collins's eyes, trained and steady, followed each subtle movement, waiting for the precise moment when intervention would be necessary. Finally, the staff member moved closer to the display case, brushing past objects as though arranging them carefully. Their fingers hovered near the brooch, and for a moment the world seemed to pause. Collins's instincts sharpened, his focus narrowing to a single point, protecting the treasure, preserving history, and ensuring that the moment did not slip beyond his control. And in that quiet, measured tension, the palace once again reminded those within its walls of a timeless truth. Vigilance was not a burden but a duty, curiosity could be both harmless and dangerous, and even the smallest moments could carry profound significance. For Collins, for the staff member, and for the brooch itself, the day's events were building toward a turning point, one that would test judgment, character, and the quiet power of observation. The tension in the corridor was thick enough to touch. Every sound, from the distant footsteps of other staff to the faint ticking of a nearby clock, seemed amplified. The staff member stood near the display case again, their eyes fixed on the brooch. The sparkling diamonds and gold seemed to call to them, almost as if the history embedded in the piece whispered a story meant only for those who dared to look closely. For a moment they imagined the life of the queen who had worn it, the weight of responsibility, the elegance, and the poise she carried. Admiration mingled with something more, a dangerous curiosity that stirred unease even in the calmest minds. Sergeant Collins shifted slightly, remaining silent but attentive. He had seen this before, the way a person's curiosity could teeter on the edge of temptation. His gaze followed every movement of the staff member with precision, noting the subtle adjustments of their uniform, the quick glances toward the corridor exit, and the slight tremor in their fingers as they hovered near the case. Collins had been trained to recognize the signs of intent long before words were spoken, and in this moment, he knew he was witnessing something that could become critical if handled incorrectly. The staff member's hand brushed against the edge of the display case, ostensibly to adjust its position, but Collins noted the hesitation in the movement, the slight pause that betrayed inner conflict. The staff member glanced down the corridor as if calculating whether anyone else might be watching. Their eyes flicked back to the brooch, the diamonds catching the light in a way that seemed almost purposeful. Collins's instincts sharpened further. He remained calm, outwardly still, but every muscle in his body was ready to respond. For several long seconds, the staff member lingered, caught between admiration and impulse. They straightened, took a deep breath, and adjusted their stance, trying to appear as though nothing unusual was happening. But Collins had learned that appearances could be deceiving. He had watched enough incidents unfold to know that a person's intentions were often revealed not through words, but through hesitation, glances, and subtle physical cues. He waited patiently, letting the staff member's actions reveal themselves fully before he intervened. Then the staff member did something more deliberate. Their hand moved again, this time with a slightly firmer purpose, brushing against the corner of the display case as if testing the reaction. Collins's eyes narrowed slightly, tracking the motion with trained precision. He could see the calculation in their movements, the quiet risk assessment taking place in real time. Every instinct told him to stay alert, to be ready to act if necessary. He had learned that even the smallest delay could allow a situation to spiral out of control. A faint sound echoed down the corridor as another staff member carried a tray of tea into a nearby room. The staff member near the Brooch froze for a moment, startled, then quickly composed themselves. They adjusted their posture, smiling politely at the passing colleague, masking the quickened heartbeat and tension that they could not completely hide. Collins noted this behavior carefully. It was a classic sign of guilt or awareness, an attempt to maintain composure while internal conflict churned beneath the surface. The staff member's eyes darted back to the Brooch once more. The diamonds sparkled, and the gold gleamed with an almost magnetic allure. For a brief moment, their admiration overcame caution, and their hand hovered dangerously close to the display. Collins's body tensed subtly. He had to act soon, but he knew timing was everything. Intervene too early, and the staff member might withdraw and pretend nothing happened. Wait too long, and the consequences could be severe. He had only a narrow window to ensure the safety of the Brooch and maintain order without creating unnecessary alarm. In that moment, the staff member made a small, almost imperceptible move. They leaned slightly forward, brushing their fingers against the display case with just enough pressure to make Collins's trained eye recognize intent. It was subtle, almost invisible to anyone else, but for a man who had spent years safeguarding priceless artifacts, it was a clear signal. Collins inhaled slowly, ensuring his next steps were measured, deliberate, and precise. He could not afford to panic, nor could he allow hesitation to compromise the moment. The staff member paused, seemingly unaware that they had revealed their intentions. They adjusted the arrangement of some small decorative items near the case, a nervous tic that had become part of the ritual of their indecision. Collins watched quietly, noting every motion, every flicker of the eyes, every subtle movement of the hands. His patience was not idle. It was active observation, a quiet control that would allow him to act decisively when the time came. Suddenly, the staff member glanced over their shoulder, a motion that betrayed anxiety despite their attempt to remain calm. Their eyes met Collins's steady gaze for the briefest moment. In that instant, the staff member realized they had been seen, though Collins had not yet moved. The recognition sparked a flicker of panic beneath their composed exterior. Their hand hesitated again near the Brooch, caught between curiosity and fear, between desire and conscience. Collins's instincts sharpened further, knowing that the confrontation was now inevitable. The corridor seemed to shrink around them, the walls lined with portraits of monarchs and courtiers long past, their painted eyes watching silently. The polished floors reflected the scene, doubling the tension in a way that almost made the moment surreal. The staff member adjusted their stance again, hands folding neatly in front of them, trying to appear casual. They tried to mask the nervous energy that threatened to betray them, but Collins had learned to read the subtle language of human behavior, the way guilt and temptation left traces in posture and expression. For a few heartbeats, the staff member seemed to weigh their options. They could retreat, pretend they had been merely adjusting the display, or they could continue with the risky behavior that had brought them here. Their breathing remained calm, but their eyes flickered toward the exit, then back to the Brooch. Collins recognized the internal struggle instantly. He knew that words would soon be necessary to prevent escalation, but he also understood that the way he addressed the situation would determine whether it ended quietly or drew unnecessary attention. With a careful, measured step, Collins moved closer. His presence was firm but not aggressive, commanding attention without raising alarm. He spoke in a calm, authoritative tone that carried across the quiet corridor. "Excuse me," he said, his voice steady. "Please step away from the display." The staff member froze. The polite words, spoken with a controlled firmness, struck like a bell in their mind. They realized they had been caught in the act, their intentions now clear to the one person whose vigilance they could not escape. A flush of embarrassment mixed with fear crossed their face, and they instinctively took a step back, hands lifting slightly in a gesture of compliance. Collins noted every micro-expression, every subtle motion, and held his position. "What I was just," the staff member began, but Collins raised a hand slightly, a gesture signaling calm yet authority. "Please remain calm," he said, his tone unwavering. "I need you to stay right here while I ensure everything is in order. The brooch is safe, and there's no need for anyone to be alarmed." The staff member swallowed hard, realizing the seriousness of the situation. Their earlier thoughts of curiosity and temptation now seemed reckless, almost foolish. They nodded slightly, eyes cast downward, the weight of their choices settling upon them. Collins remained observant, his stance protective yet composed. The corridor felt charged, the history of the palace pressing silently around them, as though even the walls understood the gravity of the moment. A few moments passed in silence, each one stretching longer than the last. The staff members' breathing slowed as they tried to regain composure, and Collins allowed a small relaxation of his posture, though his eyes never left them. He had handled many situations before, but each required the same combination of patience, awareness, and controlled authority. He knew that any misstep could escalate tension unnecessarily, and he was determined to ensure that the moment ended with dignity and order intact. The staff member finally spoke again, their voice quieter, tinged with nervousness. I didn't mean any harm," they said, glancing at the brooch one last time. "I was just curious." Collins nodded slightly, understanding the mix of curiosity and misjudgment that had led to this moment. "Curiosity is natural," he replied, "but some things must remain protected. You must understand the importance of preserving these treasures. They are not just jewelry, they are pieces of history, reminders of a life and legacy that extend far beyond any one person." The staff member nodded, swallowing their guilt. They understood now more clearly than ever the responsibility that came with working in the palace, the trust placed in them, and the consequences of overstepping boundaries. Collins remained calm, his presence reassuring yet firm, a steady hand guiding them back to reality. As the corridor returned to its usual quiet rhythm, the staff member stepped back fully from the display case. They adjusted their uniform, composing themselves once more, their earlier nervous energy replaced with a cautious respect. Collins remained alert, watching them move toward the main hallway, ensuring that the brooch and all surrounding treasures remained safe. The tension slowly ebbed, leaving behind a quiet understanding between them. The staff member had learned an important lesson, and Collins had executed his duty with precision and care. The palace itself seemed to exhale, the walls echoing the centuries of discipline, vigilance, and integrity that had kept its treasures safe through countless generations. The corridor seemed unusually quiet after the staff member stepped back from the display case. The soft hum of distant activity continued in the background, but the tension lingered like an invisible thread between Sergeant Collins and the staff member. Collins' eyes never wavered, tracking every subtle movement. He could feel that the moment of decision was approaching. The staff member, still nervous, seemed to understand that their earlier hesitation had been noticed, that they had walked a thin line that could have had serious consequences. For a moment, the staff member lingered near the center of the corridor, seemingly unsure of what to do next. Their eyes darted toward the exit, then back toward the brooch, a mixture of curiosity and regret crossing their face. They had been caught in a delicate balance between admiration and temptation, and now they were confronted with the reality of their actions. Collins sensed the internal conflict immediately, reading the tension in every small gesture, the slight trembling of hands, the nervous shift of weight from foot to foot, and the anxious flicker in their eyes. Collins took a careful step closer, maintaining a calm and composed demeanor. His voice, measured and authoritative, filled the quiet corridor. Please remain here. I need you to explain yourself, he said, his tone firm but not harsh. It's important that you understand the seriousness of this situation. The staff member swallowed hard, their face pale with anxiety. I didn't mean to, they began, but Collins held up a hand, signaling them to pause. His gaze remained steady, unwavering. The staff member's nervous energy was like a live wire, crackling in the silent corridor, and Collins knew that any sudden move could escalate the situation. He had to guide this carefully, using calm authority to prevent panic or rash decisions. I understand curiosity, Collins continued, his voice calm but precise. It's natural to admire such a piece, to feel drawn to its history and beauty, but this is not something that can be touched lightly. The brooch is a symbol, a part of history, and it must remain protected. You need to tell me what you were thinking and why you moved closer to the display. The staff members' hands shook slightly as they folded them in front of themselves. Their gaze dropped to the polished marble floor, unwilling to meet Collins' steady eyes. I just wanted to see it closer, they said quietly. I didn't realize it would be a problem. Their voice trembled slightly, a mix of fear and embarrassment. Collins nodded, his expression calm but firm. I understand that, he said. But you need to understand the responsibility that comes with being in this palace. These treasures are not only valuable, they are part of the history of the crown. Every action, no matter how small, can have consequences. The staff members' breathing deepened slightly as they processed Collins' words. There was a flicker of relief in their eyes, knowing that they had not yet caused irreversible harm. At the same time, a sense of shame and understanding settled over them. They realized how close they had come to making a serious mistake, how easily curiosity could have turned into a disaster if Collins had not been alert. Collins took another careful step forward, ensuring that his presence was both reassuring and authoritative. I will need to escort you to a secure area for further discussion, he said. This is not a punishment but a precaution. I need to ensure the safety of the brooch and understand exactly what happened here. The staff member nodded, their face pale but composed. They understood that resistance was not an option, and they allowed Collins to guide them gently but firmly toward a nearby room used for secure discussions within the palace. The corridor seemed longer than usual, the polished floors reflecting the weight of every step they took. Each movement was measured, deliberate, a quiet dance of control and restraint. As they walked, the staff member glanced back at the display case. The brooch shimmered under the light, as though acknowledging the tension of the moment. For a fleeting second, they felt the pull of admiration again, but it was tempered by the awareness of responsibility and the presence of Collins, whose watchful eyes made any impulsive thought impossible. The lesson was clear. Beauty and history demanded respect, and no desire, no matter how intense, could override duty. Once inside the secure room, Collins asked the staff member to take a seat. The room was modest, yet its purpose was clear, a space where sensitive matters could be addressed with discretion and care. Collins remained standing, his posture firm but calm, his eyes never leaving the staff member. There was no anger in his expression, only a steady resolve to protect and preserve. Now, Collins began, his voice even, I need you to tell me exactly what you intended when you approached the display. The staff member took a deep breath, their fingers clutching the edge of the chair slightly as they tried to find composure. I didn't mean to steal, they said quietly. I was just curious. I wanted to see the brooch more closely, to understand it, to feel connected to history. I didn't think about consequences. I wasn't thinking clearly. Collins nodded slowly, listening carefully. He had heard similar explanations before, though each situation was unique. Curiosity is natural, he said again, but there is a line that cannot be crossed. Handling this brooch without permission could have caused a serious problem. Not just for you, but for the palace, for history, and for everyone who works here. Do you understand the gravity of that? The staff member's eyes filled slightly with remorse. Yes, they said softly. I understand now. I didn't think. I won't ever do anything like that again. Their voice was steady but carried the weight of a lesson learned. Collins could see the sincerity in their expression, the recognition of responsibility and the beginning of understanding. For a few moments, they sat in silence. Collins allowed the pause, knowing that sometimes reflection was more important than words. The staff member took the time to collect their thoughts, to process the realization that curiosity, unchecked, could have serious consequences. Collins observed quietly, his presence a steady anchor, ensuring that the situation remained under control and that the lesson was clear. Finally, Collins spoke again. "You have made a mistake, yes, but this is also an opportunity. You can learn from this and you can demonstrate responsibility and trust in the future. The palace relies on the integrity of its staff. Every day, every action matters. Do you understand that?" The staff member nodded firmly this time, their posture straightening. "Yes," they said. "I understand. I promise to do better. I will be more careful. I will respect the rules and the treasures here." There was a quiet determination in their voice, a sense that the incident had left a lasting impression, one that would shape their actions in the future. Collins allowed a small, approving nod. "Good," he said. "Now we will return to the corridor. The brooch is safe, and it will remain that way. Your duty here is to assist, to observe, and to respect the history you work among. That is the responsibility of every staff member in this palace." As they walked back through the corridor, the staff members' steps were steady but measured. Their eyes no longer lingered on the brooch with the same intensity as before. Instead, they carried a quiet respect, an understanding of the role they played within these walls, and the importance of the treasures they were entrusted to protect. Collins walked beside them, his presence calm yet firm, ensuring that the lesson remained clear and the situation fully resolved. The palace returned to its rhythm, the distant sounds of daily activity resuming in muted harmony. The brooch continued to gleam under the light of the display case, untouched and secure. The staff member had learned a critical lesson about responsibility, curiosity, and integrity. Collins had executed his duty with precision, ensuring that the moment passed without harm, without panic, and without scandal. And as the day moved forward, the palace seemed to hold a quiet acknowledgement of the events that had unfolded. The walls, the floors, and even the portraits of past monarchs seemed to witness the resolution of tension, the restoration of order, and the reaffirmation of trust. It was a reminder that vigilance, patience, and careful observation were as essential to the safety of history as the physical security measures in place. The staff member returned to their duties with a renewed sense of purpose. Their movements were deliberate, respectful, and attentive. Collins resumed his post, standing tall and watchful, his eyes scanning the corridor as he always did, ready for anything. The brooch remained untouched, a gleaming symbol of history preserved through the calm, careful actions of those who understood the weight of responsibility. In that quiet resolution, both the staff member and Collins understood an important truth. Moments of temptation could arise anywhere, even in the most controlled environments, but integrity, vigilance, and respect for history could guide actions and protect what mattered most. The palace, centuries old and steeped in tradition, had once again demonstrated that its treasures were safeguarded not only by walls and locks, but by the dedication and awareness of those who walked its corridors every day. The palace had returned to its usual rhythm, the soft footsteps and hushed voices of staff filling the corridors once more. Yet the morning's events left a quiet mark that lingered in the air. The staff member walked through the halls with careful attention, their steps slower than usual, their eyes no longer drawn immediately to the display cases or the treasures they held. There was a new awareness in their posture, a subtle weight in their movements, as though each step reminded them of the lesson learned earlier. They carried themselves differently now, not with fear, but with respect, a respect born of understanding the responsibility their position required. Sergeant Collins returned to his post near the display case. The brooch, sparkling under the soft light, seemed almost serene in its secure position, untouched and safe. Collins stood perfectly still, the familiar sense of vigilance settling over him like a shield. His eyes, sharp and steady, scanned the corridor with practiced precision. Though outwardly calm, his mind reviewed the earlier moments, analyzing every detail, every gesture, every hesitation of the staff member. His training and experience allowed him to remain composed, but he knew that the quiet successes were often the most important. Preventing harm without creating panic or embarrassment was a skill few mastered, but Collins had done so countless times over the years. The staff member approached the brooch display once more, this time merely to admire the piece from a distance. There was no longing in their gaze, no impulse to reach out or touch. Instead, their eyes lingered with appreciation, understanding the centuries of history and tradition represented in the delicate arrangement of gold and diamonds. The brooch had once rested against the queen's gown, symbolizing grace, duty, and authority. Now it symbolized something more for the staff member: the weight of responsibility, the importance of respect, and the consequences of impulsive choices. Collins watched quietly, noting the change in demeanor. The staff member's previous tension and hesitation had given way to a calm, thoughtful composure. They adjusted a small item on a nearby table, ensuring that it was straight, neat, and in order, a subtle demonstration of renewed attention and care. Collins allowed himself a small, approving nod. He knew that true learning often came not from words or reprimands, but from reflection and understanding. The staff member's actions now reflected a conscious decision to act with responsibility, a testament to the effectiveness of patience, observation, and guidance. Later that morning, Collins escorted the staff member to the palace's administrative office, a quiet space where staff issues could be addressed with discretion. There, the staff member met with senior staff, who discussed the incident calmly but seriously. The discussion was not a harsh lecture, but a reflection on responsibility, trust, and the unique nature of working within the royal household. The staff member listened attentively, nodding in acknowledgement, and spoke honestly about their intentions, their curiosity, and the lesson they had learned. "I understand now," the staff member said quietly, their voice steady and sincere. "I realize how important it is to respect these treasures and to follow the rules. I won't make a mistake like that again." One of the senior staff smiled gently. "We all make mistakes, especially when we are curious. What matters is that you learn from them. You now know the responsibility that comes with working here. Integrity and vigilance are as important as your daily tasks." The staff member nodded, absorbing the wisdom in those words. They felt a mix of relief, understanding, and determination. The incident had been a close call, yet it had provided a valuable lesson that would shape their conduct for the rest of their time in the palace. They left the office with a renewed sense of purpose, their steps measured, and their mind focused on doing their duties with care, respect, and attentiveness. Back in the corridor, Collins resumed his watch, observing the brooch and the surrounding area with quiet diligence. Though nothing more happened that day, his presence served as a silent reminder of the importance of vigilance. The palace itself seemed to breathe more easily, the polished floors reflecting the sunlight streaming through the windows, the portraits of monarchs watching silently as if acknowledging the resolution of tension and the restoration of order. Over the following days, the staff member carried themselves differently. They were more attentive in every task, from arranging flowers to polishing silver, from guiding visitors to ensuring that objects remained in their proper places. Their newfound awareness was evident to colleagues and supervisors alike. The earlier incident, though minor in physical consequence, had left a lasting impression. It had demonstrated the delicate balance between curiosity and responsibility, and the staff member embraced this understanding fully. Collins, observing quietly, felt a subtle satisfaction. His role was not to punish, but to protect, to guide, and to ensure that history remained safe. The brooch and the countless other treasures of the palace were preserved not merely by barriers or security systems, but by vigilance, patience, and the thoughtful actions of those entrusted with their care. He knew that teaching responsibility often required moments of quiet intervention, moments where observation and careful action prevented mistakes before they could escalate. The palace continued its rhythm, as it always had. Visitors marveled at its grandeur, staff carried out their duties with dedication, and the royal treasures remained secure under the watchful eyes of those like Collins. The staff member, once caught in a fleeting moment of curiosity, had transformed that experience into a lasting lesson. Their respect for the palace, its treasures, and their responsibilities deepened with each passing day, a reflection of growth born from reflection and guidance. In the evenings, when the corridors were quieter and the palace settled into a peaceful rhythm, the staff member sometimes paused near the brooch display. They admired the piece without desire or temptation, appreciating its craftsmanship, its history, and the legacy it represented. It was a reminder of the lessons learned, of the importance of integrity, and of the vigilance that safeguarded centuries of tradition. The sparkling diamonds and gold no longer represented mere beauty. They represented responsibility, trust, and the continuity of history. Collins continued his watch, unwavering. The incident, though minor in the grand scheme of palace life, had reinforced the critical role of observation, patience, and measured intervention. Guards were not merely present to intimidate or enforce rules. They were observers, protectors, and guides, ensuring that the treasures and traditions of the royal household remained intact. The brooch was safe, the staff member had learned a valuable lesson, and the palace continued to function with grace and order. Over time, the story of that morning became part of the quiet, untold history of the palace. It was not a tale of scandal or drama, but of vigilance, understanding, and growth. The staff members' respect for the palace deepened, their duties performed with renewed focus and thoughtfulness. Collins' watchful presence remained constant, a silent reassurance that the treasures of history were protected not only by walls and locks, but by the wisdom and care of those entrusted with their care. The staff member often reflected on the incident, realizing that curiosity, while natural, needed to be balanced with responsibility. They understood that every action within the palace carried weight, that each decision, however small, could influence the security and integrity of history. The lessons learned in those tense moments shaped their conduct, guiding them toward careful, deliberate, and respectful behavior. As months passed, the palace continued to welcome visitors, host events, and maintain its storied traditions. The brooch remained on display, gleaming under the soft lights, a symbol of continuity, elegance, and vigilance. The staff member performed their duties with dedication and care, fully aware of the lessons learned and committed to upholding the integrity of the royal household. Collins remained at his post, vigilant yet composed, a guardian of both history and the lessons it imparted. In the quiet moments of reflection, the staff member understood that the palace was more than a building or a collection of treasures. It was a place where responsibility, respect, and vigilance intersected with history. The brooch, once the center of a fleeting moment of temptation, had become a symbol of growth, of learning, and of the enduring importance of integrity. The palace, timeless and resilient, continued to stand as it always had, its treasures safe, its traditions preserved, and its lessons quietly taught to those who walked its halls. The staff member, shaped by experience and guided by understanding, embraced their role with care, diligence, and respect. Collins, a steady presence in the background, continued to watch over history, ensuring that the past remained secure and the present honored its lessons. And so the day ended as it began, with quiet dignity, careful vigilance, and the knowledge that even the smallest moments could carry profound meaning. The staff member had learned the importance of responsibility and respect. The brooch remained safe under watchful eyes, and the palace continued to embody the timeless values of duty, tradition, and integrity. The lessons of that day would remain with the staff member forever, a testament to the power of observation, guidance, and the quiet strength of those entrusted with protecting history.